Hi, my name is Belinda and I am going to help you to get up to speed and learn a little bit about how to use our content management system. It's called Emaki and it is the CMS that we use for the Valnet Auto sites to create, to update, manage and track all of the content that goes up on those sites. Just little disclaimers before we get started. This training video is going to be generally quite informal. The reason for that is that Emaki is constantly changing and being updated. And so a bunch of these videos get made over time and they are updated. I also don't think that there's any reason for this to be super formal. It is going to be a relatively long video and nobody wants to hear really long droning speeches all the time. So I trust you will be comfortable with just having an informal chat and showing you how the system works as we go along. I will also be making timestamps for this video available to indicate to you which sections occur at what time, so that if you do need a refresher, it's much easier just to refer back to the section that you need and then just pop into the video and fast forward to that spot and just review it basically. I very much suggest having your Emaki open while you are watching and listening to this video. It's just a lot easier to play along as you go. You can't really do any sort of accidental publishing. I know a lot of people have always said that's the reason why they don't want to play around on the back end, but please do so. You can't accidentally publish anything or mess anything up. So please do have this that open on a separate tab or on a separate window as you're going through this training video, and follow along in Emaki so that you can write down questions as you're going along. As we get started with Emaki, you would have been given your login details by Valnet. And so you just want to open a browser. I have a shortcut here, but you just type in emakicms.com at the top, and then you need to log in. You will log in with the credentials provided to you. Sometimes you may see that a two-factor authentication process is required, in which case a 6-digit or a 6-number code is sent to your email, which you just need to fill in, and it then brings you to this. This is the back end. This is Emaki CMS. Yours may look a little bit different to mine, and you will likely have only the brand that you're working for over here. So don't panic. It doesn't have to look exactly like this, but you will have the necessary tools at your disposal. What I'm going to do is basically just run through all of the available tools that are here that apply to you, that you will need to use. I'm going to ignore these ones over here because they're not really something that you will need to be worried about. But you will see in the top left-hand corner that you have your profile block. Yours might be blank. And the first thing that I'd like you to do is to click on your name, and you're going to fill in all of the details required here. At the top right here, you will see an edit profile button. I would like you to click on that, which will open all of your personal information. It's important that you fill this in as soon as possible because this will appear on all of your articles as they get published. I'm going to just show you a real quick example using Carvas as our example. And you'll see under every article that's written, your profile will appear there, and the first couple of words of your profile pop up there. And that's really important, and I'm going to show you why. So under your edit profile, you've got various tabs at the top. We're going to start with the user info tab, where you are required to upload a profile picture. Standard practice is to do something a little bit more professional. I personally hate that because it looks terrible. At least my picture does, but everybody else looks fantastic. So try and put a picture in there that you would like to represent you, because it pops up as a little avatar next to your name. Fill in all of your information, and then you will click on Save User at the bottom here. Under Author Details is arguably the most important stuff. Fill in all of your social media information here, and below that you are going to fill in some information. Under the About You section, the first 150 words that need to be put in there are the words that are going to appear here. So this needs to be a comprehensive summary of your expertise, your experience in motoring, as that's going to be the first words that people see about you. You can carry on writing a little bit more about that, and I'll show you what this looks like on the front end once we're done. Under SEO Bio, you just follow the prompts for each little block. And under these ones over here, you can select a question to provide an answer to. And you can also insert links into these that link to some of the articles that you may have written. There's also the opportunity to add a profile banner image, your qualifications if you want, and your expertise. And to show you what that looks like on the front end, I'm going to quickly navigate to About Us, and then you will see our entire team listed at the bottom here. And using myself as an example, this is how it shows. The profile banner comes up on the back end, and this is all of the information in this order that applies. Please make sure that once you fill this in, you have checked it at least once or twice. We've had some people's bios going up with spelling mistakes that are genuinely not reflecting really well on you. So that's the first step, and that is something that I would like you to do immediately. Under the pinned sections, you can ignore that for now. That's just if we want to pin any specific articles to your profile. Once you've done that, you're going to click Save User and Exit, and that is what this panel is for. Under this panel as well, you will see that there are various other useful tools. Lower down, it gives you an overview of your past month's performance, your current month's performance, and sort of looking at a graph figure of how your sessions, the sessions of the articles that you've done are performing in general. A little lower down, you can also filter and see all of your latest articles, what their active sessions are, how many people have viewed the page, and that's just a very useful tool. It will vary from person to person and depending on the type of content you have. Your expectations for your target outputs will be discussed with you once you have been onboarded. Under editorship, the same would apply if you are primarily an editor and not a writer, whereas authorship relates to the articles that you have written yourself and submitted under your name. Under payment category, if you click on that, it takes you to your payslips and the agreements that you have with Valnet regarding payment, and the same would apply to rates. That is the very basics of your profile edit, and that is the first step that you need to complete. Once you've completed your profile, I'd like us to get started on just looking at the brand that you're going to be writing for. The buttons over here are the first step to getting where you need to go. So if you are writing for Carbaz, for example, you would click on that button, and this takes you to a very basic dashboard. Now, once again, yours is going to look very different because I have a bunch of preset filters up here for the various intents that I manage. So yours will not have this right at the outset, and likewise, it will not have these things over here. What you will see in the panel below is a list of every single article that's currently being worked on in its various states. It's pretty much self-explanatory. You can see the article name, author, network. This network payment, intent, and content type I'm going to explain in due course. Don't panic about that. The type here tells you what type of article it is, whether it's synced with what's going on the front end or not, and the article status, which is really important. Is it in draft? Is it completed? Has it been submitted for approval, etc.? Published status, very important as well. Has it been published? Has it not been published? And further on to the right, if I scroll across a little bit, it also gives you some very important dates of last publication, original publication, or when it was updated. I just basically want you to be familiar with that. Now, these column names apply to basically what are these filters over here. And this is a way for you just to be able to set up easy and quick things to click on that will pertain specifically to you. For the most part, you can leave that blank entirely because there's also a very useful search. And if you were wanting to search for absolutely anything, you simply type it into the search bar and it will pop up with every article that has been named something in relation to what you've typed there, who has written it, and the kind of article that it is. And in that way, you're able to find what you're looking for. Am I looking for an overview or a gallery or some of our tabs? And so that is quite okay if you don't want to set up filters. If you did want to set up filters, I'm just going to clear this and then show you how you would do that. Under article status, you would pick the kind of thing that you're looking for. For argument's sake, if I was trying to find all of the articles that I had written and submitted for approval, I would click this button, meaning find me all the articles that have been submitted for approval, but not necessarily approved yet. The category, if you've had a specific tag, and I will explain tags a little bit later, you can pick one of those, but you can leave that blank for the purposes of this example. Same with the content type, same with the network category. And then in published status, I would pick unpublished because the article that I'm looking for has been submitted for approval, but not necessarily completed or approved. So my published status would be unpublished. Sync status you can ignore, and same with type, same with classification, and then intent is the important one. You will be told which intent that you are going to be writing for. It could be evergreen, it could be feed, it could be news, or variations of these intents. Those are the ones that we use for the most part on the Valnet Auto sites. You can leave this blank, however, for example, if you write for various intents, as I do, you can just find all of your articles. Payment categories you can leave, and article templates you can also leave. Under the author block, I'm going to type my own name. Editor, if you are looking for something that you have edited, you would type it in there, or if you're looking for something that you have ideated, you would type it in there. And a specific tag that you are looking for, you can also type in there. Tags I will explain a little bit later in this video. You are also able to select date range. For example, if I am looking for all of the articles that I've written, submitted for approval, but have not yet been checked, I would, and I'm looking for that for November, I would select the date range there. So from the 1st of November to the 6th, which is today, I would hit apply, and it would bring up nothing because I have not submitted anything that hasn't been published just yet. But if I take those dates away, it will bring up something that was done in way back when, because that is my training article. It's obviously not been published for that exact reason. And that is how these filters work. So once you have then selected these various things, if you click on this little plus button over here, you can type in a preset filter name, and it would be something like all my stuff submitted. And you'd hit plus, you'd hit the correct button, and it would then add it to this list of presets that if you wanted to just very quickly log in and see everything that you have submitted that has not yet been approved, you simply click on that and it will bring it up for you. Similarly, for example, if I am looking at all of the evergreen articles that I need to edit, I would click on that button and it brings it up for me here in a lovely list. Once again, if I'm looking for the one that I've just created, you simply click on it and it appears for you there. If you want to delete it, click on the little dustbin. If you want to create more, you just go through the same process. That's the very basics of setting up these filters. And you can also do those as for various things, as I've mentioned before. If you want to change the way that these columns are displayed, so perhaps something is more important to you, you can simply click on this button here and select what is important for you to see. If you only want to see the dates, the type, the intent, for example, you leave those checked and hit save, and it will only display those for you, which is very, very useful if you're trying to find something. And that is the very basics of the article dashboard. Once you're comfortable with that, I'd like to move on to this panel on the left here. And once again, it will not necessarily look exactly the same for you, depending on your role and the permissions that you've given. A lot of these things over here are specifically for the section leads in order to change the actual building blocks of the site, so to speak. So if you don't see all of these, please do not be concerned. The most important thing is that you are able to add articles and to access them on this panel over here. Naturally, if you click on the articles link here, it takes you to this very basic dashboard, and that's the most important one. The other one that may be available to you and is super interesting is the analytics bar over here, where you are able to have a look at 30-day performance, for example, of all of the things that you have written, which is very, very useful if you are specifically tracking, for example, how many page views you've had, or you want to see the success of your articles. Once again, you can filter by various things at the top over here, and you can add your own filters as I have just shown you before. Similarly, there are things like article leaderboards, author management. All of those are things that you can have a look through if you have them available to you. Also, make sure that you are under the appropriate badging here for the site that you are writing for, if you are writing across various sites. And then lastly, with regards to this panel, is that you can change the way it displays, which isn't necessarily something that I do very often at all. I like to have my little words on the side, and that's quite important. Now we're going to move on to how we would very basically get started writing an article. And so for that purposes, we will always navigate to the articles page. This is where we're always going to get started if we want to write an article. So the first thing that we would do, and it doesn't matter where you are on your filters or presets or anything like that, this is your best friend button. You simply click Add Article, and Emaki will give you a variety of options, presets that you can choose from. For the most part, you are going to be using either regular or list, unless you have been told to do so otherwise, and this can be also changed after the fact, which I'll show you as we go along. If you're uncertain, just simply hit regular, because as I say, it can be changed a little bit later, but it's great to get into the habit of hitting list if you are writing a list straight from the get-go, or if you are doing a comparison, you can hit versus. And if you are doing a collection of photos for a gallery or something like that, you would do a collection. If you were doing a thread, which is on our little community forum, you would hit thread. For now, I'm going to click on regular and open our brand new interface. I'm just going to start by giving you a sort of an overview of what you see ahead of you. Everything in this panel over here and below that is the content that you are going to write and submit. At the top here, you will see various tabs that are quite important, and then your submission buttons, basically your submission, saving, and previewing buttons in the little green bar, which is quite important. On the right here, you will see this is our AI assistant. My personal disclaimer is to simply just stay away from this unless you have been given instruction to use it. It is generally safer to stay away from it. Depending on the site that you write for, there may be a no tolerance policy for the use of AI in terms of writing. The tool can be useful for helping you come up with titles and headlines and things like that, and to check on various sort of recommendations to improve your article. And we will deal with that in a little separate section. And what you can also do is move it out of the way, which I like to do to have as much space as I can to do my writing. That way it's also not in direct eyesight. Getting started writing an article, you will see that this top block over here pertains to the title, an excerpt, and some images. There are also various little buttons that I would like to show to you as we go along. But before you start, it's important to note that you have this bar over here, this little drop-down menu, which tells you the status of your article at that time. It's important to know that whatever you select from here, you need to hit save and stay afterwards in order to effect that change. So if I was submitting for approval, would change to submitted for approval and then hit save and stay. Same applies if you've made a mistake and you want to trash that document, you hit trash and then hit save and stay. We're going to stay with draft. The other thing I just want to mention is this, the auto-saving function. As you can see, it's in the process of auto-saving. You will see that it's taking a while, and it's got a little yellow button, which means that it has not quite saved yet. Once it has saved, it will update that. I think it is a sort of standard practice for our era that we all just are anxiety driven to constantly hit save and stay. I always suggest doing that because sometimes, for some reason, the system will kick you out if you have left this window open and untouched for an undefined amount of time. It could be something like 15 minutes, it could be more. I haven't tested it myself, but what I have found is if you are working in a document and you get up to go make yourself some coffee or something like that, and you come back and you continue working, sometimes it does not save your changes. It's not something that we have been able to track to a specific cause or reason enough to know how or when that happens. So make sure that you get into a habit of simply just clicking save and stay. Save and stay does what it says it does. It keeps you on this page. If you hit the save button, it will save your document but exit you back to the dashboard. So please bear that in mind. Then I want us to have a look at these tabs up here. The first one is called article, and if it's not underlined, it's the page that you're currently on. So this is what your article looks like at present. If you click on the next tab, which is attributes, this is our very important article admin section, and it's something that you will be told specifically depending on the intent that you are writing for. All of the intents have various different categorizations, and each writer also has a different payment category. It is very important to fill in your name as author, although this auto-populates if you create an article, it puts your name in there. If you're an editor, for example, and you need to change the author for whatever reason, you can do it over there. Display authors is literally as it says on the front end. Very often we will have articles that are, for example, sponsored content, or it is something that we are writing for somebody else if they're at a show giving us information on if they're giving us information on interviews or things like that. The author is the person who's writing it, but you can put two names in there. For example, I can put myself. Sometimes Emaki just takes a while, and I can put one of my colleagues. Both these names will then display on the front end, but the authorship remains attributed to myself. Your segment lead will be, you will get in touch with your segment lead, so you'll know who that is. It's different for every intent. For argument's sake, I'm going to put myself, because I'm the boss of me. And the editor will put their name in here. And the ideator field below that is very important as well. As an editor, this may become your job to fill that in. If the writer has not filled it in, which is often the case with freelancers or somebody who's just been assigned a topic, you may not know who the ideator is, but your segment lead will, and they will fill in the ideator there. This is very important because if you are, you should definitely spell your name right. This is very important because if you are in a role where you are pitching your own ideas, for example, on our feed team, we do have some writers who are allowed to create their own ideas. Your name going in this field is imperative because there is a very specific bonus structure that is applied to topics that are successful, and the ideator does get a kickback from that. Under your payment category, you may or may not have access to all of these things once again, but under the payment category, you will basically select the option that is going to make sure that you get paid as the writer for this article. You will be told what this is because some folks are registered as performance writers and some folks are standard freelancers. Some folks are full-time writers, and all of this is dependent on that. For the purposes of this, I'm simply going to classify it as a feature. And then on the left side here, the categorization is very important. This tells the article under which sort of categories and departments it should be listed. Remember when I said right in the beginning that we are able to change the type of article that we are creating, whether it's a list or a collection or a comparison? This is the area where you can change that under type. So if you have selected regular and you realize after the fact you're actually doing a list, you can simply click list over there. Same with collections, same with verses. If you are writing model overviews, you will select subcontent. And if you are writing a thread, you will select thread. Most of these are self-explanatory. Again, you can change it here, and your editor may or may not change this if they feel that it is right or wrong. Templates. This is a very interesting way of displaying how our articles look on the front end. And basically what it does is change up the way that the article's featured image is displayed. For example, if we had this on rich, the standard way that it should appear is like this, with a lovely big featured image. Please excuse all of my adverts. I do not use an ad blocker. It gives you this lovely big featured image, and that is sort of the standard layout for our articles. However, if I were to change this from rich to light, for example, it would change up the way this displays to look like this. A smaller featured image with the headline next to it, and the rest of the article follows as is. If I were to change this to minimal, it would remove the featured image entirely and just look like this. There may not be very much reason for you to use this, but just so that you know what the functionality does in case you are ever asked to do that. We did have some of our comparisons at one point where we used tag display cards instead of featured images, in which case that would change. It's just important to me that you know what that functionality is. Below the template, we have classification, which you can just leave on standard. Don't fiddle with that. And under network category, because this is for the Valnet Auto sites, you will pick something that relates to the automotive market, which in general is auto culture, auto mass market, auto performance, or auto racing. If, for example, you are writing something regarding a supercar, or it's a test drive of a Nissan GTR, for example, you would pick auto performance because the focus of that article is performance. If you are writing an article on more mass market mainstream cars, for example, competitors to the Kia Sportage, or Sportage as they say in America, you would pick auto mass market. And if you were writing something, for example, on a JDM car meet, you would pick auto culture, and then auto racing is self-explanatory. For the most part, you will be likely using between auto mass market and auto performance. Under intent, this is the very important one. You need to indicate which intent or which department you are writing for. In our Valnet Auto sites, that will be between evergreen, feed, news, which we classify as short-term, or model overviews, which is support. Your team lead will make sure to explain this to you and make sure that you are familiar with which intent you are writing for. It's important that you differentiate which intent you're writing for because the rules, the processes, and the expectations for each department do vary. So make sure that you are familiar with which intent you're writing for. I'm going to select evergreen just for the purposes of this. Content type, underneath that, you will also be told in advance what the type of content is that you are writing. For the most part, it is either going to be a list, which is where we do, for example, the 10 fastest cars for 2025, or 15 or 10 competitors to the Toyota RAV4. Any kind of list article will be indicated here with list. And if it is a general feature, a historical piece, or an explainer, it will be under a feature. If you are writing news, this will vary up a little bit, and that will be explained to you in depth by your news lead. News is an entire video on its own. So the aim of this video is just to make you comfortable with Emaki. All of these little nitty-gritty bits will be explained to you by your team lead. Because I have picked a feature there, I'm just going to pick feature here again, and I am going to use that for the remainder of this example. The very next tab to the right is the Sandbox or Republish feature. And this is a phenomenal tool that I'm going to touch on once I have shown you how to write an article from scratch. So put a pause on that one and we will come back to the Sandbox feature. You'll see there's not much happening here now anyway, but I will show you how that works. The next tab over is the additional fields, and this is a very important section because for every article that we write, we have 3 headline and 3 excerpt options. The first one is the one that appears here under the article tab, under title. This is your site title with an excerpt to match, and hopefully I can spell properly. This is your first title and excerpt, and this is what appears on the site right over here. Whatever we see on Carbaz, on the front end here, these are the site titles, and that your segment lead will explain to you what that looks like or what that needs to look like. And then the second title option is the SEO option. SEO, which is search engine optimization, relies on keywords and trying to cater to what people are searching for on that specific topic. This title will very likely be a little bit more bland, but it is usually catered to try and be the article that comes up when people are Googling things. So this, if I was, for argument's sake, writing 10 competitors, please always use capital letters, to the 2026 Kia Sportage, that's my site title, then my SEO title would be likely Kia Sportage, because that would be the first thing searched, competitors for 2026. Just for the record, SEO is something I will touch on separately because, again, that's something, it's a completely different skill to that. You can also then enter a completely different description, which will come up on SEO under the search items. And what's important to notice, or what's important to note, is that our websites are set up in such a way that this title appears on site for a couple of days, and then after, I think it's 7 days, it defaults to this SEO title to capitalize on search functions. So make sure that both of those are crafted in such a way that they play to the strengths. Social media titles are titles that come up on your Twitters, your Instagrams, Facebooks, LinkedIn, and those can be completely different and more attention grabbing than what we have over here. So you basically have 3 different titles. And if I were trying to think of something sort of attractive for social media, I would say something like worthy alternatives to the 2026 Kia Sportage you haven't thought of yet. This is just an example, obviously, but just to explain to you how those work. You would also insert a different description for each one. And for social media, you also have the ability to select a different image. We will get to images in a little bit. That is what this tab does. It's very important that each of these needs to be filled in. There is the opportunity to use AI for help. I am not a fan of it, unfortunately, but that will depend on the site that you are writing for and your team lead and the editing standards over there. I think that the AI, unfortunately, tends to generate things that is very generic, and I think that it blunts our creativity to rely on that too heavily. So my suggestion is always to try and be creative. A little lower down, you also have the option to add a thread, which is a discussion prompt to your article, where you would type in, what do you think is the best competitor to the Kia Sportage? And you would type a little prompt. There are many options on the market in 2026, etc., etc. And then you would also just put your name, for example, so that when this prompt is live and people are commenting, it will give you a notification that somebody has commented. This is not something that needs to be done for every article. You will be told if it needs to be done. For the most part, you can just ignore that. We then move across to the widgets tab over here, and you will see that when your article is in draft or submitted for approval or changes required, there's absolutely nothing going on here. The minute an article is moved to completed, and remember I have to hit save and stay. I needed to get to that as well. I will get to that. It's going to bring up various widgets for you to use over here. I apologize if there are a few things happening while I'm talking. I'm literally, as I said in the beginning, we are just doing this conversational style. So I will quickly show you how the featured images work so that we can come back to widgets. Now, featured images, there are 3 different blocks, and the little gray outline tells you what it's for. This first image here is the image that is going to appear on a website on a desktop computer. The image here is what will appear on a mobile. And this image over here is a thumbnail image that appears alongside our articles on the front end here and on our social media. You do not need to add a different image for each one here unless you have been specifically asked to do that. Your job is just to find an image to put in here. The way that this is done is by clicking on the block, and you will see that there are 2 very faint sort of sections. There's a select an image here for article thumbnail and select an image for the featured image. Once again, you can try and use AI suggestions. I suggest not doing that because images on their own are a very big deal. There's a lot going on with images regarding where you can source them from legally, how they need to be uploaded, and sizing. If you are just, for the purposes of this, we are just going to select a standard image that is already on the Emaki system. The Emaki system has thousands, if not millions, of photos already in the system that you can select from. And for this example, I'm just going to show you how to do that. You would simply click on Select Image, and this is our image picker box. Various options come up here, including adding your own images, which we'll deal with later. and some filters here that you can search by. My suggestion is to always select from the upload sources the brand that you're working for. It should automatically select Carbuzz if you're logged into the Carbuzz tab. And under ratio, you would select the appropriate ratio for your site that you're writing for, which in this case is 16:9. And then you have two options. You can either just simply search in here and pick Kia Sportage, for example, and you'll see a whole bunch of images come up there. But I have found that these images are not necessarily correctly ordered, and they don't necessarily tell you, unless you click on each individual image, what year model it is, so you don't know if you're using the correct one. If you want to see what the image is that you're looking at, you can hover over it and you get two options. You can either insert it, or you can click on the edit button, in which case it brings up the image for you with its credits. And that tells you what the year model is, who took the image, who it's credited to, and to make sure that it is tagged. I will explain that to you a little bit later. So if I'm looking for a 2026 Kia Sportage, in this case, this is a correct image. The other way that we can search, which is a little bit more reliable, but is something that is still sort of being bolstered in this process because we have only relatively recently adopted a very strict photo uploads policy, is to search by tag. And now, searching by tag is dependent on the fact that photos have been uploaded and tagged correctly, and that is by typing in here Sportage, and you will find a drop-down menu and finding the vehicle submodel year car database tag. Clicking on that brings up all of the images that have been tagged with the 2026 model year. And if I then click on that button over there, it's going to give me the overview again. All right. So I'm just going to use that as my featured image, and I can either just click on it like that and it will insert. You do not need to, as I said before, select a different thumbnail unless you've been expressly instructed to do that. We do that for things such as our car test drive reviews. For the most part, one image is fine. When you hit confirm, you will see that it shows you in all three ways what the image would be. I should now be able to save because it requires a featured image to save. No, of course not, because I haven't told you about primary categories. The other important things that occur in this block over here are these buttons down the side here. I'm going to click on the first one and then just show you what this is all about. This is just ways in which you can select where your article is displayed and its layout, and generally, for example, if it was under embargo. Again, not necessarily functions that is going to be available to everybody, but it's good for you to have the understanding of how that works. Under visibility, you can, this for argument's sake should always be on visible everywhere. But if you were writing something specific that needed to be hidden from either the home page or from trending, you would select that option here. Under the auto units, you can add a sponsored disclaimer. There is a table of contents button, but please do not use it because we have a new function that replaces that, and we don't want a double table of contents, so you can ignore that. Unless you have been instructed to, you can also ignore quick shop and quick shop links. Under layout, you have something that changes depending on the type of article that you have written. For the most part, you can absolutely ignore this. If you are writing a list, and to do that, I'm just going to change this quickly to a list to show you. If you are writing a list, this last thing changes to how your list will be ordered. Will it be ordered in ascending numbers, for example, 1 through 10, counting upwards? Will it be descending, counting downwards from 10 or 15 or whatever the case may be? Or whether your list will just be a list with no numbers, just listed. This is very important if you are writing features, for example, ranking articles by top speed, and you want to go from slowest to fastest or fastest to slowest. This is how you determine that. There are various and ever-changing rules regarding how our listings work, so make sure that your team leader has explained that to you, what is the expectation for the intent that you are writing for. Under layout, you can still also change whether or not there needs to be things hidden. You can leave this alone for the most part. And under general, if you are writing a news piece or a drive review that's under embargo, you would click the Under Embargo button. And if you were writing model overviews, you would click the Sub-Content button. Sub-Content and model overviews will be explained in a very separate training section. It's not something that most people need to know. Live blogging is the option that we have to create a notice at the top of an article that says this is currently being updated throughout the day. We often use that when we are doing mobility shows or events where we are adding images or adding stories to the post. If you click on Under Embargo, you get this beautiful little red E here to tell you that the article is under embargo so that you don't accidentally publish it if you are, for argument's sake, editing it. And that is basically what this does over here. Moving down a little bit, if you click on that button over there, it's basically just an overview of the article header where you can change the title, the permalink, and the excerpt. While we're looking at permalinks, I would like to just explain to you what that is. The permalink is what follows after any feature. So we'll take this one for example. On Carbaz, all of our URLs start with carbaz.com/ and then have a little tail end and ends it off with another slash like that. That highlighted section is the permalink that you need to fill in here. And there are rules and guidelines to how to optimize your permalinks, which your team lead will also discuss with you. But for the most part, it should be very simple, very to the point, and it should not contain any fluff or any unnecessary qualifiers or adjectives or things like that. If it was for this 10 competitors to the Kia Sportage, it would be something like 10 competitors 2026 Kia Sportage. It's simple and to the point, and there's no fluff that's needed. The excerpt is what shows up a little bit lower down on the front end, for example, over here. That's your site title, and this is your little excerpt. So it needs to be something that's going to grab attention, that if somebody was scrolling through this list and they wanted to know if they should read that or not, it needs to be put in there. And then you can hit confirm. Below that is just your image widget, which we've already opened by simply clicking on the image. And below that, we have a categories button, very important secondary admin that we need to know how to categorize every single article that we do. You will be told, depending on the intent that you are writing for and the type of content that you're writing for, what to use. For example, if you are writing news, it would always be news. If you are writing features, it would likely be mainstream cars or performance and enthusiast cars. If you were writing a feature on an engine, for example, it could be design and tech. Your team will have a cheat sheet for you to tell you which categories to use. For this article example, we're just going to click on mainstream cars. And you'll see it brings up a little tab like that. And very, 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 very importantly is that you have to select a primary category, meaning you have to go in and physically click it to highlight the little dial. The reason for that is that you may have more than one of these categories, but it needs to have a main category. So this example, mainstream cars, is going to be our main category. I'm going to hit confirm and move one down to this, which is the tags. Now, articles need tags, and the reason for these tags, you will hear the word tags used everywhere. These tags are important because it tells the Emaki system where to basically keep and present the article that you are writing. And that's because we have various sections. For example, here we have car reviews, so anything that's marked as a car review will pop up here. And if you click on any article, and you go right down to the bottom, you will see that it has the little tags listed at the bottom here. And that helps you also to find similar articles. So if I had tagged in this example, I would definitely tag Kia because the article relates to Kia. I would also tag Sportage. And I would tag, for example, a buyer's guide because I am advising people who are looking at the Kia Sportage what other competitors there are, and I know that the instruction for the department that I would be writing for would be to add new cars because these are new cars that are currently on sale. As with categories, you have to pick one to be the main tag. and you will be told which one that should be. Editors, specifically, this is part of your job to make sure that you have done this correctly. I know it's got to be new cars for here, but it could, for argument's sake, be one of the others as well, and then you hit confirm. If I had Kia over here and I click on that, I'm just going to open a new tab to show you. It takes you to the BMW homepage where everything that has been tagged with BMW is listed. The same applies to anything that relates to the 2024 BMW 5 Series specifically. And then the same applies to mainstream cars. So it's very important to have your tagging correct because it tells Emaki where you want to store and sort of collate all of the articles that are being written. And without those, it also won't save. So I'm going to try a trick while I'm chatting to you and just go back to submit it for approval because I want to see if it can populate that other option for us. So once you've done all of that admin and you then theoretically want to submit this, it's going to bring up a content values guidelines bar, which will tell you if there is something missing. Now, because there's literally no content in this article, the content optimization bar is in the red, which is terrible. But it gives you a bunch of tips here that you need to try and do correctly. For example, all my metadata is correct, but I need to actually put images in the article. There are no links in the article. All of these red options will tell you guidelines on how to improve your score. That will be explained to you in your actual writing guidelines per the sites that you are writing for. But just to explain to you what it does. And once you have been able to submit your article, now we can go back to the widgets bar at the top here. And this is basically an AI, the AI's ability to provide either a factual summary or a simple summary or a light-hearted summary for each article. You will see when you have a bunch of content in your article lower down here that it actually generates full-on AI summaries for here. You will be instructed, depending on the site that you work for, which of these need to be ticked or unticked, and you then hit save and stay. That is what the widgets bar is for. The revisions bar is to tell you and to show you any changes that have been made, and we can come back to this once we've done a little bit of writing, and it will list for you on the left here changes made by who and the date and time, and in the content below here it has the ability to show you what changes were made over time. You can then compare versions and you can revert if, for example, you've made a mistake or something like that, you can revert. It's important that you also know that using this, we can then also track sort of any changes made or any edits made. If, for example, somebody claims it has been edited and we go back into the revision section and see that there have been no edits made, that's a way that we can track it. The recovery bar you will see over here is currently grayed out, and that's because there is no recovery. If your computer loses power for whatever reason, or your internet conks out or something like that, the auto-saving function will provide you this tab with a recovery option, which means that it can take you back to the last auto-saved point. It's a little bit of a fallback, but I would not rely on it. Especially as there may be some auto-saving errors, which there appears to be currently. So make a habit of just hitting save and stay, but just so that you know that the recovery bar is there if, for example, you have an issue that, you need to try and at least get to the last save. The feedback button over here is very important, and that is, in general, a summary of that pop-up that we saw earlier about what's sort of outstanding from your article. Now, as an editor, there's another important step that we need to look at, and that's under the article status bar over here. If you are editing something and you are sending it back to the writer to make changes, you would click on the changes required status and then go to save and stay. It then brings up this little box for you again, telling you what's sort of wrong. But if you have a very specific instruction for the writer, you are required to write it in the comments bar here. So please add 2 more competitors. There are only 8. I'm making this up as we go along. Add galleries, check pricing. Okay. I can then hit submit feedback. And this then gets sort of sent back to the writer. They can see that feedback, and anybody who then comes and looks at the article, a secondary editor or something like that, can click on feedback and they will be told the feedback history was at this time, this person said add 2 more competitors, there are only 8 ad galleries, blah, 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 blah. Very, very useful also to track that. The analytics bar over here is also currently dead because this article has not been published or anything like that, but any article you can also come back to and come and have a look at the analytics and see how that article is faring. That is a summary of the tabs at the top here, and we will definitely be come back for the Sandbox and Republish feature, and we may touch on these as we go along. Before we move on to actually getting started with the writing part of it, we just want to have a quick overview of this over here. The preview button is exactly what it says it does, and that is an important thing that you should also get into a habit of before submitting your article. You are able to preview it in a desktop view or in a mobile view. And it's important to know the differences because sometimes the way that we present our information looks great on desktop, but not so great on a mobile. A large portion of our readers actually are on mobiles, but once you've clicked preview, it will show you how that looks. There's no content here to look at. You will see that it displays both of the authors that I had added originally, 0 content, and all of our tags at the bottom. If I can briefly show you how it would appear on mobile, you will see that it is a little pop-up like this, and it just makes it a little bit easier for you to see if you've got very, very large walls of text, for example, which can become a little excessive. The sync button over here is simply to tell you whether or not what you're looking at on the back end aligns with the front end. In this case, it does not align, it's not synced because it has not been published. All right, let's move on to actually looking at getting into the writing. Now, if we look below the images, we will see what looks like very standard sort of tools. You may be familiar with them, or at least with some of them from other CMS systems, from Microsoft Word, from Google Docs, but we're going to run through them just so that you know their usability. The very first one on the left is called Source, and it is something that I will touch on a little more in depth once we actually have some content here, but very basically, you can toggle between the information that you are writing here and the source code on the back end that builds that article. And that happens in real time. You know the difference between the writing block and the source code block because if it is grayed out, you're currently in source code mode. And if it is not grayed out, you are on the front end. So we come back to that once we are done over here. This block over here is obviously where all of your writing and creativity happens, and you make use of the tools at the top here. The first couple are cut, paste, and copy, and that is completely sort of standard. And you also then have an undo and redo function. In my experience, these are also often linked to whether or not it's been auto-saved, so please be careful and wary of that. The next button over here is called the remove formatting button, and that's very, very important. Many people choose to write their articles in a different format. Maybe they write it in Google Docs, or maybe they write it in MS Word, and they then copy it into Emaki. It creates a huge amount of problems if you're copying in from a different source because of the formatting issues. So if you are copying in, my advice to you is to copy from the other document and hit Control, Shift, and V to paste into this document, which strips that formatting. And if you're not doing that, once you have pasted into here, for example, let me just grab some text from somewhere, and I'm copying straight into Emaki, so please highlight that and use the remove format button. And it has made no difference here because it is the same formatting on the front end, but you will often see that this then shifts the size of the text to be native to Emaki, if I can use that phrasing. Otherwise, the text can appear too big or too small, and it just throws everything out of whack. My personal preference and my personal suggestion, having worked on the system for quite a number of years now, is to rather write straight into Emaki. Yes, you do have the potential that you may lose work if you haven't saved regularly, or if you're going to get up from your computer and go away for 15 to 30 minutes and come back, and you may have some problems. But if you get into the habit of saving and exiting, if you're going to be away from your computer, you should be fine. It just prevents a lot of glitches that tend to appear in terms of formatting between headlines and images and stuff like that. But that is what this remove formatting button is for, and it's very important that once you have copied into Emaki that you make sure you remove the formatting. Moving over to the next button is straightforward, adding a hyperlink to the text, and that is done in a very simple way. You simply highlight the text that you want. Make sure you do not include the space before and after the word. Click on the link, and then you would bring in your link that you want to link to. I am using this as an example. This is incorrect. And this little link box that populates gives you all the info you need. The display text, you can change it in there if you want with their current. If I wanted to add the word pricing, I would add it in there. And then I paste the link into the URL block. I can also choose whether I want this to be an internal link. For example, because this is a CarBuzz link, it is an internal link. It could be an external link to a sister site or to an authority site, or an external sponsored link. It can also be an external no-follow link. Again, depending on your department that you're writing for, this may vary, so be sure to check with your team lead. In this case, it's an internal link, so I would hit OK. And there I can see that my little link is included. What I meant by not including the spaces is to please not do that, because it then looks like such, and that is terrible, and it absolutely wrecks my OCD. If you wanted to remove the hyperlinking there, you would highlight the entire section and simply click on this button, which is unlink. Very quick, very easy, very straightforward. That is how you do in-text hyperlinking. The next button over is our tables button, and I would like to spend some time just explaining that to you because it is a very useful tool, but it needs to be done correctly. Otherwise, the tables also appear very strange on the front end. Alrighty, the next thing we want to look at is tables. Tables can be a really great tool, and it's something that we should try and use in the majority of the articles we write, as it presents information in an easy, sort of digestible format for our readers. However, the first thing that I want to say about tables is please do not copy tables in from any other source, whether it's from Google Docs or an MS Word document. Please do not copy tables into Emaki from any other source. They look wrong. The source code behind them just never works. If you're going to be using tables, this is the way to do it. And I'm going to show you all the little shortcuts that make it super easy to deal with. So straightforward, we've got the Insert Tables button over here. And if you click on it to open it, it gives you the table properties. Now, very simply put, you're only concerned with the rows and the columns. And I'll explain the headers to you, but it's not something that you necessarily need to be worried about at this stage. Cells spacing, cell padding, and border size, I want you to just ignore. It's straightforward. Very obviously, how many rows do you want? How many columns do you want? And this headers button says whether you want your first row to appear as a header or the first column to appear as a header, or both. And the way that that looks on the front end is as follows. The column that is marked as a header will appear in a sort of darker background color with emboldened headlines, and the rest are interchangeable light and a slightly darker one. If I were to make the first column and the first row, define them as headers, both this one and this one would be dark. For the most part, it's easiest just to have this one as a header and the rest marked as data. However, I'll show you how to change that after the fact. So my trick for doing this is simply just to put in a random number. My sort of default is 5 and 3, and then to insert it. And you'll see that it inserts a little bit funny to begin with, so I just do random keywords just to get started. Now, when you have a table like this, this is not necessarily the way that you want it to look, so you can go ahead and play with it. Any cell that you click in, you can right-click and it will bring up some options for you. First and most important is the table properties over here. If you click on table properties, this is how you can align the entire table on the page. I don't really want you to stuff with that. Just leave it as it is. unless you've been told otherwise, because sometimes it will literally put the table, for example, right in the middle over there, and that will just look funny if you've got a skinny table. So just leave it as it is, where it is, and it should automatically space out on your page as it does over there. However, in any cell that you're in, you can also right-click, go to the cell, and have cell properties to look at. Now, you'll see that there are very many other functions, and we're just going to run through those quickly. So for each cell, you can insert a cell before, cell after, you can delete that cell, you can merge that cell with one cell down, you can split it horizontally as such, which gives you 2, or you can split it vertically, which is also useful. You need to play around with this because you will see that there are various ways that the table reacts if you are merging or splitting cells. And the best advice that I have for you is to practice and to play around with this because it can be incredibly useful. If you click on cell properties, you get the option to align the text that's in the cell in a certain way. And generally, we want the horizontal alignment set to center and the vertical alignment set to middle. However, if you have very complex tables, it may be better to have your horizontal alignment set to left. Again, please play around with these things because it's very important that you get accustomed to how to use these tables to the best of your abilities. Sometimes if you want to have, let's say you want to do a table of specs for performance and you want to do stuff like engine, transmission, drivetrain, and let's say 0 to 60 times. And we want to create a solid sort of header over here. You can select those cells, right click, and then merge them. Then you have a solid sort of header, which we can change to, let's say, 2026 Kia Sportage performance specs. And then you'll see it sort of spaces out rather funny. Now, because I know in my mind, for example, and don't quote me on this because I'm just going with what I sort of know on the fly, is that the Sportage, which I have spelled horrendously wrong, the Sportage has got 2 engine options, a standard gas only one and a hybrid. So we want to list both of those, for example. And the best way to do that, which means we need to have various columns and various rows as well. So what I want to do over here is to add another row ahead of engine where we can define that. So I would click on the engine cell, right click, and then go insert row before, which gives me exactly the same. And then here I would type gas only, and there I would type hybrid. You'll see that it sort of automatically spaces out now, but it's still not 100% equal. And this is the biggest tip and trick that I have to show you. In order to space these out in the best way possible, you simply highlight all of the cells that you want to spread out, right-click, go to Cell Properties, and under this Width section, important first step is to change this one from pixels to percentage, and then under the Width box, you're going to add the percentage that each cell needs to take up of 100. So because there are only 3 columns, we want those to be 33.3. Because 100 divided by 3 is 33.3. If I had 4 columns, that would be 25%. If I had 5, it would be 20%. If, like me, you suck at maths, that's perfectly okay. You literally just default going 100 divided by however many columns you have, and you click OK, and it spaces it out that each one is perfectly equal. Now, to make this look even better, we're going to click on the header column, right-click, go to Cell Properties, and select our cell type here is not going to be data, that's going to be our header. We also then want to make sure that it is center and middle aligned so that it looks nice and neat. And we're going to do similar with all of the remaining cells. Right-click, Cell Properties, and we're going to leave those as data because we don't want them to be highlighted as headers, but we're going to center and middle align them. Now, to make these further stand out, for example, if we go back to this over here, this is not a header, but it has been made bold to stand out a little. I'm simply going to select them and hit bold, which is Control B on your keyboard, or you can use the styling buttons over here, which just makes it look a little bit better. This column over here, you can also, if you have very many, make this left aligned for neatness. But that is something that you can play around with, and also remember to align that to what your segment lead wants. Okay, then you can go ahead and type all of your information in here. I'm going to make stuff up so that you can see. Let's say this is a 2-liter inline 4, and this is a 2-liter hybrid inline 4. Please don't quote me on these figures. I'm making it up as we go along. Here we're going to say 8-speed auto, and here we're going to say CVT, and the drivetrain here we're going to say, let's say we have two drivetrain options here. Let's say that you could have a rear-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive version of this car, and we wanted to include both. Instead of doing something like bullet points, which just looks incredibly cluttered, for example, if I did this, that looks incredibly cluttered, but what we could do is change this to split the cell horizontally or vertically, and I would choose vertically there because we want it to fit under the same header. Now you'll see that it's auto-spaced differently because if you remember we had these selected to 33% and now there's a fourth cell. Don't panic, I'm going to show you how to fix that. First, what we're going to do is add what we wanted to add here to make it make sense. And now, because we have 4 columns, we're going to select the entire table. If you see that it gives you like a weird spatial issue, just select up until the last cell, right-click, hit, ooh, that looks really strange. Thanks, Emaki. Let's try that again. Hit cell properties and then go up to your percentage. Make sure that it says percent, not pixels, and then change that to 25 because 100 divided by 4 columns is 25. You'll see that it sort of evens out then, but this last row still also needs to be changed. So we're going to go back and do the same thing there. It does say percent, so I'm simply going to change that to 25. You'll see that it immediately then spaces everything out beautifully. Now, let's look at the difference on the front end, and you'll see why it's important to know how to change the way that it spaces out. This looks much better. Now you can see that under the hybrid header here, we have the engine, which I've spelled wrong, the transmission, and the 2 drivetrain options. Now, the same way that we've played around with that, and just to compare that, is how it looks out when it's correctly spaced, versus that, which is incorrectly spaced. You can see that it's a much better option to take the 2 minutes and space it out properly. Now, what if, for argument's sake, let's just change that and pretend there's only one option there. What if, for argument's sake, they had exactly the same transmission option? Instead of simply duplicating and having the same thing there, we can literally merge the cell. So I would empty that, select both cells, right-click, go to cell properties, right-click, and go to cell, merge cells. That makes it one cell. And now let me show you how that looks on the front end, because that makes our table a lot simpler to read. Apologies, my computer is a little bit slow today. And that is how that looks. Now you can see that even though each has their own engine, they share one transmission option. The gas-only model has all-wheel drive, while the hybrid has 2 options. As you can see, that looks a lot better. Now, our issue comes into this last little block over here. If we wanted to put in a 0 to 60 time, I'm just going to randomly say 5 seconds for the gas-only model. But the hybrid model would likely be different because we have 2 drivetrain options. Again, all of these specs are made up. Please don't quote me. This is literally just to show you how to go along. And if we wanted to then change this up again to have 2 cells, one underneath each, this is how we would do that. We simply make sure that we are clicked in the cell, right-click, cell property, cell, highlight the cell block, and then click on split the cell. And we're not going to choose horizontally, we're going to choose vertically, because that simply splits the 2 of them, which gives us the opportunity to change this up and put our own specs in there. Hit save and stay, and we can see how that works out on the front end. Now, the other thing that bugged me on the front end was how this column looks over here. So I'm going to change this to be center aligned so that everything evens out really nicely. Hit save and stay again, and if we go to a preview, we'll see how our little table looks. And that's what we're left with. And as you can see, the header is the one with the darkest background. You've got your two options, your metrics basically on the side, and each one that is allocated correctly. Now, there's probably one more trick that I would like to show you, is that in this header field here, you can also change the sizing of this text, but I'm jumping slightly ahead to H2s and H3s, but it's something that I'll mention here, and as we go along, you'll be able to link that back. If you wanted this to appear a little bit bigger, you can do that. I wouldn't advise changing any of these things, as that is just going to make it look really funny in the table. However, if you wanted to highlight something very specific in this table, for example, if we wanted to talk about which is the fastest configuration of, or rather the quickest configuration of the Kia Sportage, you could highlight the text in your cell and come down to these little blocks over here and change the coloring on that. This is something that should only be done if you have been given the OK from your segment lead, just for consistency's sake, and depending on the site that you write for, they may want a specific color. But that's how you can change, for example, certain things in the table. Let's make that green, because green is great. And that would appear on the front end in a way that highlights what something that you want to stand out in that little table. You can do the same. As you can see, the green doesn't show up really well, but that one is highlighted for you there. In general, you would probably use colors that stand out a little more in line with your logo of the site that you're writing for. You can also do the same here and change the background color, and this is sort of very standard in any document that you're working with tables. You simply pick your cell, and then you can choose a background color. And now we're going to go with blue, because that's my favorite color, and hit OK. And let's see how that looks on the front end. And you'll see it looks like that. It's not great, in my opinion, but again, that is something that you will run past your segment lead and work with individually. All right, let's quickly talk about deleting. If I was an editor, for example, and I'm looking at this and I see that the rear-wheel drive version of the Sportage has been discontinued and I now want to remove this, and I don't want a sort of blank cell, there's various ways that we can do that. We can either select both those cells and merge them into one. That's the first way to do it. Or if I wanted to delete this entire column, for example, I would click on the cell, right click, go to column, and hit delete columns. And it will then bring me back to only having two. If I then wanted to add a third option, for example, if there was an EV only Kia Sportage, and I wanted to add a third option in our table, you go to the cell that you want to sort of include something after that, right click, go to column, and then you can insert a column before or after. And then you can say EV. Obviously, this is nonsense. There is no EV Kia Sportage yet. Lol. And then obviously you just have to neaten this up. So now we have the header looking funny. So we would just merge those cells so that it makes it look good again. And then we can go ahead and play with our cells. Those are the very basic, and obviously the same applies to the rows. You can insert a row before, and you can insert a row after, and you can delete those rows if they don't work for you. Doing tables like this is super, super simple. And there really shouldn't be any reason why you can't use the tables in Emaki and try and copy in. If you copy tables in, it's going to be a recipe for disaster, and you're probably going to cause your editors to lose their minds. So please play around with the tables and make sure that you can use them the way that they are intended to be used. All right, that's how we do tables. I'll give you some tips and tricks about that towards the end. All right, that's how we do tables. One button over is we have a 2 columns button. This is not something that for the most part you need to be worried about, but if you were writing something that required sort of like a newspaper style, you could click on this. If you need to add a page break, and this depends on the stylistics of your department and site that you're writing for, It is something that you can simply add by clicking, and it gives you a solid line. And an example of how that looks on the front end would be something like this. Oh, this actually doesn't show up on this one. My bad. This one. You'll see it just gives you a very straightforward little gray line. It's not something that necessarily always works, so again, please don't use it unless you've been told to use it. Next to that, we've got our special characters button, which is very standard in most sort of word processing apps or programs, and you'll know how to use that. If you need something of that sort to be added in there, you can do that. And next to that is a new thing called insert code snippet, which I would like you just to ignore for the time being. We're going to move on to images now, and that is going to be a very important section, so I'm going to just time mark that for you right now. Alrighty, we're moving over to this button over here, which is the Insert Images button, and there's a little bit that needs to go into that, because this is going to cover uploading images as well as how to classify them correctly to make sure that they're labeled correctly, and also how to use them. So let's just start straight away by clicking on the Insert Images button and seeing what comes up. You would have seen this with your selecting of the featured image, but we're going to go a little bit more in depth. When the image picker opens up, it shows you all of the images that are currently in the Emaki database, and they're very much sort of just listed by newest to oldest. So these are things that have been uploaded most recently. It doesn't mean that the picture, the car in the picture is the newest car. And what you will see when you hover over these images is that you've got various little tools at the bottom here. This is an edit button, which if you click on it, it gives you the very necessary information, the title, the alt text, whether it's under embargo, who we credit for it, descriptions, and tags. If you look next to it, you've got a plus button, which is to add this to an image group. Next to that, we've got inserting images as a grid, and that button over there is to insert the image as is individually. Firstly, I want to just show you how you can search very easily, depending again on the site that you're writing for and depending on their requirements for images. You can search for images that have a watermark, that have a very specific orientation, or that have a specific ratio. For the example that we're working with car bars, we would look for images that have this ratio because that's the standard expected ratio for car bars. If you would like to look whether the image has been enhanced using AI or not, you can click that. It's something that I don't use. And over here, where the upload source has it been the Greater Network or the initiative that you're writing for, it defaults to the one you're writing for, and mostly that's perfectly fine. You can also search by upload date. Has it been in the last 24 hours, last week, or last month? And you can select whether you want them filtered by this. Choosing to filter them by alphabetics is a touch and go situation because that's assuming that the image has been uploaded properly. I like to believe that in the last couple of months, all of our images have improved in quality in terms of being uploaded correctly, but that's not a guarantee. So we've done the quickest searches over here. You can type in absolutely anything that you want over there and see what comes up. But there's no guarantee, obviously, as I've mentioned before, that this is correct or not correct. Searching by tag is what we would want to do for the most part, but again, if the tagging hasn't been done correctly, that's going to be a problem. So the first thing that I think we should look at is how you are going to go about uploading your own images. And before I do that, I'm just going to close all of these tabs here. And we're going to access the Kia press site. We want all of our images to come from accredited sources. You will be provided with a list of sources that you may and may not use. Press sites for the American markets are your best bet. And so very simply, you go to the media site and you would pick, are we doing 2025 or 2024? I cannot remember. 2026. Right, so I would pick Sportage 2026, and I'm looking for images, and here are some images over here. I would not just indiscriminately pick pictures, but I am going to do that now for the sake of this example. I'm just going to pick a bunch of pictures because I want to show you how to upload them. And once they have been downloaded, just for interest's sake, want to also download some interior shots for you. There we go. And then we've got a bunch of images that we have downloaded. For the most part, you're going to want galleries of images, so always downloading more is better. I'm going to talk you through the very next step because it's going to depend on your site that you're writing for, as well as your office setup and all of that, how you're going to do this, but your images need to be cropped to the correct size. What I would do from here is open my downloads folder, and my images would appear there, and I would crop those to the right size. For carbas, in this example, they have to be 1920 by 1080, and we're going to assume that I have done that here. My next step is just a little hack that I have learned to make life a little bit easier, and again, depending on the tool that you use, this may be a step that's included in that tool. Once you have cropped them, it may allow you to name the files individually. If not, before you upload them, click on the images that you want to do, and I usually do it in 2 batches, exterior versus interior. Right click, and we're going to rename those to 2026 Kia Sportage Exterior, and we're going to rename the interior ones in a batch in the same way. 2026 Kia Sportage Interior. Now that they've been named correctly, that sort of takes a step out of the process that makes my life a little bit simpler. Now, I want to upload these, and again, we're going to assume, we're going to pretend like I have cropped them to the right size. You will get a warning if you haven't, and I'm kind of hoping that it's going to show us that. So, we go back to our image picker, and in the top left, we've got Add Image. If I click Add Image, it's going to ask me which images I want to add, and if I select to my Downloads folder, I'm going to add all of these images. Simply click on them all, hit open, and it's going to process adding those to the Emaki database. It gives you the option, would you like to apply enhancements to the upload for upscaling and for color adjustments? I generally just hit no on these because I'm making sure that I use the high quality images from the manufacturer. If you've got older images or grainy images, you can give these a bash, and in which case you would select which one you want and click on yes and let the AI do its magic. I do advise, if you're going to do that though, to hit save and stay and do a preview, because sometimes the AI does wonky things and you land up with stretched images or images that look like they come from a spaceship somewhere. I'm going to hit no and then watch as Emaki adds that to the database. You'll see your images are then added over there, and if you scroll along, they're all added. They're all highlighted and ticked, and before I simply choose save, I'm going to make sure to hit edit all. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I need to add text. Now, it is not asking me to add the title or the caption to that text because it's going to automatically pull the name that I have used when I saved these images, which is the reason I chose to rename them before upload, meaning it's going to upload these images as 2026 Kia Sportage Exterior with a number allocating. That step is kind of important because it cuts some of your work out. If you haven't done that, I'm going to show you how to deal with that. Credit text is vital. Every image that goes into the Emaki database needs to be given a correct credit. And so in this case, it is going to be Kia because we sourced that from the Kia website. If the images were under embargo, for example, you got them from the manufacturer and you're typing something up ahead that is going to be scheduled to be published at a specific time, you would click under embargo, and watermark capabilities are also available, but that's something you will be taught individually should you need it. Under the description, in general here, we want to have something that describes what we're seeing. So I would say something like 2026 Kia Sportage facelift, or if I were uploading in smaller batches that were for example, cars in motion, I would say 2026 Kia Sportage, dynamic road test, or, studio set or something like that. And then we move down to the most important one, which is tags. And the reason this is important is if these images are not tagged, you cannot find them on the front end by searching for tags, and they are not allocated on the back end to the correct vehicle. This is a vital, vital step. And if this hasn't been done, your editor is going to send this back to you and tell you to go and tag them correctly. And that's a schlep to do after the fact. So make sure that you do it correctly on startup. We're going to hit 2026 Kia Sportage and see what pops up. Unfortunately, in this case, we have a whole bunch of things that come up, and the first one is usually the one we want. Don't just click, however, go and double check. It has to say in brackets, vehicle submodel, year, car database. That's the correct tag to pick. These other ones lower down are specifically for the specific trim, and we're not going to ever allocate an image to a trim. Images should only ever be tagged with a vehicle submodel year. And we're going to click the top one. As always with these tags, that step is not enough. You need to go back and actually click the little, I believe they're called radio dials. Just click it to make sure that it is highlighted. And only once it is highlighted as such are your steps complete. You can then hit apply. And what we're then going to do, we can either hit save, which will simply upload those images to the Emaki database, which is what we saw when we clicked add image, that list that you can search through, or you could hit insert individually one by one, or you could hit insert as a gallery or insert as a grid. Your styling is going to depend on the department that you write for. My tip is to insert all of your images in one go and insert them as a gallery, and I'll show you why I do that. Because once you're at this point over here, you can chop and change. You can pick up and drag an image out of a gallery. You can reorder it. You can put it back in. You can select, copy, and paste. And if you wanted to move the entire gallery, you can simply select the whole gallery and copy it below. Now we have two. I'm going to delete that because it is going to confuse me. My tip is, and as you can see when you're looking at these images, they haven't been correctly sized. Some are wider in aspect ratio than others, which is going to cause your editor to have an aneurysm. So please make sure that you do actually size these correctly. I'm going to delete those duplicates. But once I've added all my images, I can then move the images that I like anywhere. What I can also do is create a separate gallery below that. So I'm just going to hit insert image, and you'll see your images that you've uploaded appear at the top here. I can select any of those and then come down to this button over here, which is I can either insert them individually again, insert as a grid, or insert as a gallery, or insert as image masonry, and that's a new function that we'll touch on a little later. For this little example, I'm going to say insert as a grid just to show you what the difference is. On the front end, this is how that appears. This is our gallery over here, which you see it's incorrectly sized, and you can simply scroll through the gallery as such. This is, for example, the correct sizing because there's no gross white pillars on the side, as opposed to this. And that's the reason why sizing is important. We want high quality images across the sites. That's how it appears as a gallery, and a little bit lower down, this is how it would appear as a grid, where each thumbnail can be clicked on and opened and scrolled through. The cool thing is that you can swap between these. So you can literally just drag and drop, rearrange, do whatever you want. And you can do the same with a gallery. So if you were writing a piece where you needed various galleries, I would insert one big gallery with all the images in and then just drag them where I needed them. Now, another very, very cool trick that I'd like to show you is our image comparisons. With image comparisons, what you can do is put two images side by side with a little slider that allows you to compare them in real time. An example of this is this image over here, where we've got two images that you can slide across to see one on each side. This is particularly useful if you're doing, for example, a before and after shot or a pre-facelift and a post-facelift shot. Apologies for me stumbling over my words. And you can compare them directly like that. The way to insert them is quite simple. You would open your image picker and you would pick two images, the two images that you want side by side. It can only be two, quite obviously. And once they've been highlighted, you go down to your button here and you will see it says Insert as Image Comparison. Once you've done that, it appears side by side like this. The only giveaway that this is going to have the slider is that it says Image Comparison Format at the top over there. And if I wanted to just check that that looks good, I would save and stay and go to the preview mode. And there we have our little slider. It obviously doesn't look so great on this picture. It's kind of like a, why would you do that? But it can be used incredibly effectively to compare images from a first gen to a second gen, or, various trims and things like that. The next cool function I want to show you is the image masonry function. You would have seen it pop up earlier, and that applies when you are inserting, that option applies when you are inserting a bunch of photos, 3 or up. I'm going to start with 3 just to show you how that looks. If you've selected them and you insert them as image masonry, it doesn't show up much difference on the back end, but on the front end, it shows it in a really cool sort of tiled pattern that just changes things up from a standard gallery. The more images you add, the layout will be a little bit different. You'll see here it makes the first one big and then gives you 2 smaller ones next to the side. And like the grid, you can scroll through them like that. It's a really nice feature that just makes things look really cool. And if I wanted to add some more, for example, click and hold, and I want to drag this lower down, another little trick is to just hover over the lower button and it will move down for you. Pop it into there and let's see how that changes up on the front end. It just makes things look a little bit different from just having a standard gallery. And as you'll see there, now we have a large, medium, and 2 small pictures, which really looks quite nice. That's the image masonry function. Now, on the odd occasion that you have incorrectly uploaded your images and you need to go back and fix anything, any image that's in this text is click-onable. And once you've clicked on it, it will pop up the information here. And as you can see, that is sizing is all wrong, ratio, all of that. But if you needed to change the title, you would change it in here. You would change the alt text, the credits, anything. And if you've tagged it incorrectly, you would come down and tag it here. On the, let's for example, let's say that there wasn't a tag here and I needed to come back and tag it. You just simply do the same thing that we did earlier and hit save. And it will save as is. If there was no tag, for example, let's say this is a new model that there is no tag created for it yet, the first step that you would do is discuss with your team lead, because they may be able to organize a tag being made for you quickly on upload. And in the very, very unlikely event that you are not able to get a tag made, you would just tag the model. You would just tag Sportage. You wouldn't tag anything else. All right, at this stage, there is no function that allows for the bulk editing of images. So if you've uploaded 30 images that are incorrectly tagged or incorrectly credited, at this stage, you have to do them one by one, which is why the upload process is so important. IT are working on a bulk edit feature at the moment, but as of the making of this video, it was not yet available. We'll move on to the very next button over here, which is the videos, the insert videos button. And it basically works in exactly the same way that the adding, uploading, changing, inserting of the images works. The principles are all the same. And so I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, save to say one thing. Uploading videos is something that you need to have approved by your team lead. Please don't randomly just upload videos, as there is a whole bunch of rules and regulations around where they come from, what thumbnails they use, and so forth. But the same basic principles apply in terms of how you can search for them, tagging, uploading, and searching for them and inserting them. Just as an example, for example, if I wanted to add this video over here, or let's do this one looks fire, let's just go there. hover over the inserts individually, and pop it right in there. Now, while we're on it, you'll see that things are looking really cluttered over here. And one of my best tips that I can give you when using Emaki is in between the various elements that you're working with, whether it's a table, a text paragraph, gallery, or video, always add a bunch of spaces, because if you have a bunch of spaces, you can move your various elements anywhere. If I wanted to move this video, I would simply go, you'll see a weird little pop-up over there, which gives you some spacing above that, but always go a few spaces ahead to select and a few spaces after to select. Then you can copy and literally go paste that anywhere else with some extra space. You can do the same with tables, but again, put a bunch of spaces before and after. I can then delete that and go put that right over there. There you go. And so that's one of my most useful tips, is if you want to move any element without interrupting the way that the formatting looks, put at least 4 or 5 spaces before and after, select and copy paste. All right, our very next function is going to be this one over here on this button, which is called the Insert Tags button. Now, tags are also definitely a very big part of what we do, and we have various types of tags. Just to preempt this, the word tag is used very indiscriminately on the back end of Emaki, so these are also called display cards or display tags, and they can be used in various ways. The first way that we can use them is to highlight a manufacturer, for example, over here. This is a display tag or a display card for the manufacturer for Jaguar, which gives you basic sort of information over there. The next way that we can use it is to look at a specific model, which this display tag over here is all about the BMW Z4 Roadster. Gives you all of the sort of basics over there. A lot of fun things to click on over here. You can score it as a community. You can like and add it to your following of things that you, as you are logged into Carbuzz, you can add that to your profile. And it also gives us access to a buzz score. And the other way that we can use these is in a comparison segment such as this, where we are looking at 2 different trims. And we can also use it in this way, for example, to add pros and cons to something specific, as over here. Something is wrong with this tag. There we go. Where you can add some pros and cons. We also do have blank tags that you can use, and they look like this. On this article over here, you'll see there's a display tag that has a title. This is on specific extended car warranties, where we have manually added a name of a warranty program and been able to list the pros and cons. And I'm going to show you how to use these display tags to that effect. So we start by clicking on the Insert Tags button. And as usual, you're able to search for tags by a tag type or a data set. You may have access to create tags. If you do, you will be taught how to do that. If you don't panic. You should not need to. You don't need to create tags in order to write. And in this box over here, you can literally search for anything that you want. We're going to look for the Kia Sportage tag and see what pops up. As I mentioned before, when we were tagging our images, these are all interlinked, and our tags are specifically allocated to certain things. You will see lower down here underneath the title, it tells you what type of tag it is. Is it a vehicle submodel year tag? Is it a vehicle trim tag? And so forth. The trim tags have got their very own specific characteristics, which we use for the most part in our comparisons here. Those trim tags include everything from engine to pricing to dimensions to features, headroom, legroom, the works, warranty cover. So that has the most information, and it is trim specific. The difference between, for example, the SV Plus and the standard S is indicated here, where you will see some of them say it is standard, some will say it's not available. And so the trim tags are generally only used in a comparison sense like this. There's very little other reason for you to use the trim tag. For the most part, you're going to be using the this tag over here, which is the vehicle submodel year tag, because that gives you the important information such as the base engines, the pricing, the ability to add a buzz score or to highlight a buzz score, and more. So in this case, it's usually the first one that pops up, but always double check because sometimes Emaki does some strange things, and you're going to click on that one over there. The next screen that you will see is it'll tell you, do you want a large, medium, or small tag? Always pick custom. It's just a lot simpler because in here you can select what you want to show. You can override this title here, and that's useful if, for example, you are talking about a specific version of the Kia Sportage for 2026, like the Kia Sportage Hybrid, and we don't have a separate tag for that. You would be able to override it there. If you wanted to call it something else or just to remove the year model, you could just type in Kia Sportage. It will make sense to you if you are using the tag for something specific, but you can override it by simply clicking and filling in over there. The description and SEO description boxes is something that we used in the past, and we are currently not using them, and for that reason I'm going to just ask you to ignore them. Lower down here you have the ability to override a buzz score. For example, if your car was rated, this one isn't because we have not test driven the 2026 version and allocated a score to it. So you can just ignore it. If for some reason you didn't want this to appear, you would just override it. That is what we are seeing over here, for example, this little main score. If I clicked override, this would not appear on the front end. Community rating is automatically included, and that is what you see over here. That's the community rating there. If you wanted it for some reason not to be included, you can untick it. That's what these little elements over here do. And what we can look at quickly is this section over here. Every tag should have a picture allocated, but if, for example, you wanted to change this picture to match maybe what you were writing over here, to be trim specific, you could click on this button over here, and then you are able to add an image of your own. Not something that I would advise doing unless you have a very specific reason for it and you've spoken to your team lead about it. You can also pick how you want the image to appear, small, medium, large, or to have no image at all. And very often you would choose to hide the image if you are doing a comparison of two models. Image group you can ignore, and lower down these links you can also ignore. It's not something that we use very often. And article specifics, I'm going to show you how to use them, but it's again not something that we use very often. You can allocate a badge to your trim, for example, best value, editor's choice, premium pick, or custom badge, and that's what you're seeing over here. This little yellow badge on the top says this is the best value trim, and this is the one that has the best range. And it is something that you can customize. So if you don't like the options there, you could click custom badge and just write the badge name here. So longest range, for example, is something that I would add there. You can add an image. It gets a little complicated if you go overboard with those things, however. Subtitle is something that you can also add if you want. We're just going to say prettiest Sportage, just for purposes there. I'm just going to unselect that to show you what this one looks like. And then pros and cons can be added directly here. And I'm just going to put some random letters in there just to show you. And you can add more, or you can delete one. That's how that works. The specification section is the very, very important one. This is what appears over here. The ones that you select over here. Now, our display tags are a little bit strange in a way because some of them will display here, and some, as you would have seen here, you need to sort of expand and collapse. And that is very much linked to the word base, the way that it sort of has been programmed on the back end over here. You'll see a number of these have the word base in it, sort of the first word. Excuse me, stumbling over my words. I have not had nearly enough coffee today. And for your purposes, what you need to know and what you'll learn as you go along is that the first few, base MSRP, base engine, base transmission, base horsepower, base torque, base drivetrain, those are the ones that appear on this card over here. And those are the ones that you should always be selecting at the very least. There's 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. and they should be on the top left-hand side. They may be a little bit lower down, but you can also click and drag these things around to make them appear higher up. I would not advise clicking on available trims when you do. I'm going to do it to show you how it looks, but when you do, it just sort of makes things really cluttered. And there's absolutely no reason for you to have to include make or model because you already have that here. It already tells you the make and the model all over the show. So there's no reason to include it here. I'm not sure why it has been included here. I will go and take that out. But including the first 6 there is very, very important. If you were writing something very specific and you wanted to include other things such as dimensions, you can click those as well. And if there was a buzz score allocated to this specific vehicle, which we know there isn't because this is blank over here, it would appear as little numbers out of 10 lower down, which you could then go and click on and select, and that would pop up in the section over here, which gives you the scoring. Once you have selected the things that you would like to add, this is I'm not thinking in the right language right now. You can click or unclick either of those options to select all or deselect all. You can go to the top right here and click on insert. It will then insert your tag and it looks as such. Also a quick tip and trick, wherever your cursor is in your text is where that is going to populate. So even if you have this you're looking at this page over here and your cursor is somehow somewhere else, it's going to insert it right there. So make sure that before you insert a tag, your cursor is where you want it to be. Now, to show you what that tag that we've selected looks like on the front end, we've hit save and stay, and we're clicking preview. And this is how our display tag is going to look on the front end. You would see that it is including all of these base trim things that we have selected, and there is the ability to expand it. And remember I spoke about including, for example, dimensions, because if we were writing an article on the biggest SUVs in the segment, and you can expand it, and it then gives you all of the dimensions. The available trims thing is really just unnecessary and takes up space. I've included it here to show you that's blah, blah, blah. But it's really not necessary to include it. It's just unnecessary admin. So, and that's how our pros and cons populate. And when we spoke about how we wanted to, for argument's sake, if we wanted to change anything now that we've added it over here, I would simply go back in, make sure my cursor is ahead of it, because any changes you make to the tag, it's going to populate right there, and just click anywhere on that tag. Then I can go and change it. So I don't want to override this anymore. I want to make this a medium-sized image. I want to take out the subtitle, and I no longer want to include this available trims, the warranty, the width, or the length, because it's just too cluttered, and I only want to keep my main 6. I then click on insert and it changes it up as I need it. And that's going to be a much neater look at the end of the day once you have selected the appropriate things. And we can go and have a look at that tag now that we've adjusted, and that's much neater, much simpler. It's still got some information there for us, and it just looks a whole lot better. What I often find is that the trims can be very, very temperamental, and you'll see in this case it's done a strange thing of splitting the base trim models there, the base trim specifications there into the collapsible section here. I don't like that, and I'm not going to attempt to mess around with the tag, so I'm simply going to delete it and start from scratch. Now, if I wanted to compare trims of the Kia Sportage, I'm going to show you how to do that, or if I wanted to compare the Kia Sportage to its main rival, let's just pick a random Toyota RAV4, and I wanted to add 2 tags next to each other, as we did over here. We are going to do the following process. Let us do the competitors first. We're going to do Kia Sportage, and we're going to go through that whole process that we did before, and I'm going to do it really quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is selected. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I want to compare this to a competitor, so I'm going to hit add to group once I've picked the first one. And you'll have this little pop out on the side here, which tells you that your first option is here. And let's say I wanted to compare this to the Toyota RAV4. I would click on that and you would see both of them are added there. You can drop and drag and change the positioning, or you can hit this little red button if you were looking for a different car, which I'm not. I'm looking for that one. And it's going to pop them both into this little tag group right over here. Now, when you get to this point, you will see over here it says the selected tags have got 12 fields in common, but 0 are commonly selected, which means that if I were to insert these next to each other, they would insert them without any picked specifications, despite the fact that I've already picked some on the Sportage. What you then need to do is click on this button over here, and it then gives you the option to pick any of the common specifications. These that appear here are common to both of those, and I am just going to pick the base, the ones that say base trim, drivetrain, and that's all I'm going to select. And then I'm going to click on apply, and then I'm going to hit insert. Now you can do this for up to 3 models next to each other if you are doing submodels, and up to 4 trims if you are doing trims, and I'll show you why with the trims. But first, let's have a look at how this appears on the front end. We have got, you'll see it says that there is a tag group, and it is putting them next to each other. Let's hit preview and have a look at how our tag grouping of competitors appears on the front end. We scroll down and we find our comparative tags, and you'll see it's gone a little bit wonky here, and the reason why they're not comparing beautifully next to each other is because when I inserted the Kia Sportage tag, I selected manually. So I'm going to go back and rectify that very quickly while you watch. And the way that I would do that is to delete this tag group entirely. I'm not going to try and mess around with it. And we start the process from scratch. We would go 2026 Kia Sportage. Add to group, don't select anything else. I'm hoping it hasn't selected anything else. And then do the same with the RAV4. Once it's added them to this listing over here, I'm going to go engine, transmission, horsepower, drivetrain. Hit apply and hold thumbs that this has worked. Emaki can be very temperamental. I'm not going to pretend that I always get it right and that everything always works smoothly. But if you are familiar with this, it's easy just to delete and redo. Now, let's hold thumbs, and it's still appearing funny on the back end. I'm not 100% sure why. It could be because one of these doesn't have a hub page yet. You'll see this one is in red and this one is not in red, and that's because these are 2 new models. I'm going to do a last-ditch effort to attempt this with older models and see if that works. Create a little bit of space, delete, and let's try this with 2 older models and see if that works the way that it's supposed to. I'm choosing 2 Kia Sportage. And I'm going to do exactly what I did before. I'm also checking that it is the vehicle submodel year tags. You cannot compare 2 different types of tags. I cannot compare a vehicle submodel year tag with a vehicle trim tag because they don't have the same allocated specs. It's going to be problematic to try and compare them, so don't even try. So here we're going to select base trim torque, base trim engine, transmission, drivetrain, and we're going to hold thumbs that that's going to work this time around. Okay, save and stay. And preview. And let's hold thumbs and see that this works correctly. No, it still doesn't. You'll see it has populated buzz scores here now that shouldn't have done. At the end of the day, these 2 should be nicely aligned. And yeah, that's just an example of how sometimes Emaki can drive you crazy. Let's have a look at how we could compare trim tags, because that would probably be a lot better. And if you are comparing trim tags, there's a few additional steps that you need to take. I'm just going to close these because my OCD is insane. And if we were looking at I'm going to choose 2025 because I'm not 100% sure that all the 2026 data has been done. If we were comparing Kia Sportage trims, for example, let's choose the EX. Add to group. And let's choose the SX Prestige. And let's choose the X Pro Prestige. Now I've got 3. If I wanted to change the way, which one was on top, I would just move them around like such. And I'm going to select all of their specs. Now, when I'm comparing trims, usually I want to be comprehensive, so I would click all and just apply everything that is relevant to the various trims. The idea is to compare. So you want to know if there's a difference in seating capacity. You want to know if there's trunk volume differences, and so forth. But the one thing that I would do in retrospect, I'm going to insert and then show you. You'll see that it's populating with everything, including images, and that may throw a few things out of alignment. So I would want to go back in individually and hide the image of all of these at the end of the day, just to show you sort of how you can go back and change things. This is how they would appear next to each other. They are slightly out of alignment, and that's usually just Emaki magic. We just joke and call it Emaki magic. But that's basically how they then appear next to each other, which gives readers an opportunity to go and say, okay, this one costs 38, this is 29, this is 34, with all of the various specs. Now, to neaten it up, I would remove the images, which is why they appeared so beautifully on this Nissan Leaf piece that we looked at over here, which I think was a 2025 review. And that just looks a lot neater if you remove the image, and that sort of makes the alignment look much better. So that's how you would do the trim comparisons. As I did mention, you can do that with various sub-models as well. The important takeaway from this is that you cannot compare next to each other tags that aren't the same type. So if you are doing a comparison, you have to make sure that you are doing a vehicle sub-model year comparison tag or a vehicle trim tag. The next type of tag we want to look at is how to insert a manufacturer tag, and I'm just creating a little bit of space there. Hit your insert tags, and if I wanted to talk about Kia specifically, I would just choose Kia over there. It's been recalibrated now to pop up first, but if I was struggling to find it, I can search here under tag type, and I can type in vehicle submodel year, or I can type in vehicle trim, or I can type in manufacturer. And I would click on that tag, hit custom, and then see what I wanted to include here. If I include all of the specs, I'm going to show you how that looks. It provides all of the models that that manufacturer has made. You would have seen that we did not include that on the example that I showed you earlier because it does tend to be a little bit cluttered. So if you're adding a manufacturer tag, depending entirely on what your website requirements are, you would just ignore the all models thing. It populates it as such with all of the available models on a drop down here, which takes you to the respective hub page for that. While I'm thinking about it, I just want to show you how else we use them, and this is on our Kia hub page. This over here on the side is also a tag where the available model drop down is much better utilized, and it is missing all of the information here. So I'm just going to pause this video and quickly make a note to rectify that. I'm going to attempt to show you a one that actually works. Nope, there seems to be a glitch on the back end. Apologies for that. All right, back to tagging. Now, if I wanted to remove these available models, I'd place my cursor in front of the tag, click on the tag, and then unselect available models, make sure that those are ticked. I can add some pros and cons if I really wanted to, and mess around a little bit more, change the image, whatever it is that I wanted to do. But you will see that that is much more concise. All right, the next type of tag that we can add is a blank tag, and those are very cool. you are able to search for them just by typing in the word blank, hitting custom, and you can add anything you want. You would override the name because obviously you don't want the word blank there, and you would type in whatever you want. For example, if I was comparing a specific type of tires, and I wanted to add some pros and cons, and if I wanted to add a description, I'm just going to show you what that looks like. You override to be able to put some stuff in this box, and then hit insert. I forgot to show you that you can also do an image there. You can do a custom image. If you don't have an image, click hide image. And that is how it appears on the front end. And I'm going to show you that real quick. And here is our blank tag with our, this was the description that I overrode. So you can do like a little leading paragraph with your pros and cons. And then this is how our manufacturer tag looks much neater without that drop-down menu over there. All right, there's one more type of tag that I just want to show you how to use. We are in the process of having what's called vignettes, which are not 100% finished yet. So I'm just going to show you how how it works on the tagging system if you wanted to do something very unique. We also have the option to add some display tags from our resident professionals, and this would be something that you need to discuss with your segment leads, because it would vary obviously which of your experts in your website that you're writing for have been added to the database. If we wanted to have a professional quote, for example, from our editor-in-chief, Roger Bierman, I would search for his name, I would click on his name, and then I can basically do the same thing. I can add a tag that has got his, information from him. I could put a quote in here. Carbaz is fantastic. Ooh, my spelling is terrible. Please, I apologize. And I'm just going to add some more stuff in here to fill it up a little bit. And then you can add various other things in here if you wanted to, but just to show you how that looks, if you inserted that on the front end, you have the ability to include a cool little display card that shows off the opinion of a professional. For example, it says there, Roger Bierman, profession, his automotive journalist, with all of his quotes over there. You can also add an image. There's supposed to be an image attached to this, but I presume in the making of the vignettes that has changed up a little bit. And that is basically how you would use tags. All right, once we've done with the display tags, we're going to move over onto this button here, which is called Insert Articles. And what this does is insert relevant, related articles that just adds a little bit more value to our readers. Now, a disclaimer on this first is that currently, the way that Emaki is programmed is that you won't see these for a while. They basically only appear after a set amount of time. They appear on the front end, and they look like this. This is an older article of ours, and you'll see halfway through this list of, what is this, best yellow cars or something. Yeah, every car you can get with yellow paint. You will be able to find a little display tag like this that says the Aston Martin Valiant keeps the manual sports car dream alive. And the way that this is set out is it is related to the very car that we're talking about here, because it's also an Aston Martin and it's yellow. And basically we use these sort of related links to just add value firstly, but also because it creates a really nice sort of visual break. Currently, as I said, you won't see them on the front end until a certain amount of time has passed. I'm not 100% sure what that time frame is, but as you can see, they have been inserted here in a really good way. And we want to go ahead and insert those in any way. And because we are doing Kia Sportage competitors, I would then click on the Insert Articles link, and I would look for anything that's related to the Kia Sportage or any of its competitors. Now, the article search thing, the article search function should theoretically show you suggested articles that have got something to do with what you're writing about. It's AI driven. You can see that by the fact that it's highlighted in green, and there's those little magical buttons next to it over there. But in my experience, it has not been very accurate at finding the correct articles. So please do not just default and click on the first thing that it's going to come up with. Instead, scroll down a little bit and have a look and see if there's anything that strikes your fancy that could be related, or simply search. You can go specific, and see what comes up over there, and you'll see immediately we've got things that are more relevant, including a first drive review. And I would love to include that first drive review, so I'm going to click on it, and it's going to pop up with exactly a screen that looks very familiar to and various ways that you can customize it here. You can click on this button here, which changes this insert to not look like a display tag like this, but simply just a hyperlink. So I'm going to show you how that looks by just clicking on it and inserting it. Shows up like that on the back end. Not a fan personally, so I prefer to do it as follows. And this is also obviously going to vary depending on who you're writing for. They may have certain other requirements. What you can do here is you can change the thumbnail size image from small to, or you can hide it entirely. You can override the title and change that up. You can override the excerpt and change that up. Or you could change the label, which is this thing over here that says related. You could change that and say something like test drive review, for example, and then simply insert that. There's also a third way that you can use that, and I'm going to use the exact same article to show you the various differences, and that is by clicking on it and selecting content preview. Now we've got 3 different ways of inserting related links, and I will show you what that looks like on the front end by clicking preview. Right, the first way that we can insert it is simply a link like this. Very bland, not a fan. The second way is the content preview, which basically gives you, oh, it's actually deleted one. I think I've copied them over each other. This is the content preview one, which gives you sort of the first couple of words of that article and allows you to read it that way. I'm not sure why it has not done this one over here, so I'm going to create a little bit of space ahead and after, and I'm going to delete all of that. And then I'm going to just do the standard one to show you, once you play around with the label over here, how that could look on the front end. Of course, it's not displaying at the moment because we have the current rule that it only displays after a couple of days. But basically apologies, I didn't actually realize that. What it would look like is exactly this, but there, instead of the word related, it would say test drive review. We do use those quite often on our reviews, and I'm going to quickly give you an example of that. Well, I don't know if it's going to show up. I'm just going to try Ioniq 5N. We use those on our overviews, our model overviews, very much so under our test drive feedback section. And that's exactly the example we're looking for over there. Is we have changed the label to say first drive review. And then there is this value added button that our readers can simply click on from this overview to go straight to the actual test drive review. And that is how the related button works. And it is a very useful tool, as I said, for creating a visual difference, but also adding value. Next to that, we have got a new button called Insert Vignettes. This is currently in progress, so I can't teach you anything about it yet because it's not finalized, and I don't know how to use it either. So we're just going to ignore that for now. We're going to move on to the next one, which is called Jump Links. And our jump links are what we have over here. And that is basically a content or a contents page that allows you to jump from section to section. And it is very useful, but it is decided on, or it is activated by the way that you are writing your article on the back end. So in order to show that to you, I am very, very quickly just going to delete everything in here because it is needing text. So now that we have a clean slate, I'm going to create some text, but what I'm going to do just to make this easy is just copy some of this into there and just add a bunch of text into our article. Now, In order to get jump links, we're going to jump down to this section over here, which is the blocks button. And the blocks button is very simply put how to format either as sort of plain text or whether to have headers, which we have over here. There is an H2, which is our biggest header, and a little lower down, not on this test article, is it? A little lower down, we can look at this one over here. We would have, there's an H2 over there, another H2, another H2, and then here we've got H3s, and these are a little lower down. And you will see that they relate to these jump links over here. Because if you have an H2, that is a main header that you can jump to, and if there's an H3 underneath it, it adds it as a plus here, which you can also jump to. Now the way to add that is there's two ways to do it, and they are a little bit tricksy because Emaki magic, it's as simple as that. So either I can just type out, this is a header for my first H2, and then select it, go to blocks, and then choose. Do I want a heading 2 or a heading 3, a drop cap function, and the rest of those I will deal with a little bit later. We're sticking with H2s and H3s now. That makes it an H2. Okay, and then this is a subheader. We want to make that into an H3. Or I can, if I had another H2 here, theoretically, the box where my cursor is, I can go H2 and start typing. This is my second header. This doesn't always work in my experience, so I have found it safer to just type what I want, highlight it, and change it to H2s and H3s. Now, once you have your H2s and your H3s in the correct place that you want, and you want to insert jump links, you go to the very top of your article. Make sure your cursor is at the very top of your article, because it is going to spawn your jump links wherever your cursor is. And it is a huge problem trying to get them out again because they are very finicky. Now, you will see where I am at the moment, it's made my block an H2. So if I insert the jump links there, it's going to insert it as an H2. So I'm going to just delete that and try to change that to plain. Now it's going to change my whole header, and that's how Emaki works for you. You just have to play around and figure it out. So I trust you have seen what I've just done. Changed it back to plain so that whatever's at the top here is not an H2. Now I have to hit save and stay first before I insert my jump links, because it will only insert the jump links that you had at your last save. And you simply click on the jump links button. It populates as follows. And if you then, after inserting the jump links, go and make any changes here, it's not going to pull those changes through automatically. You have to go back and save and stay, and then reinsert the jump links. And to try and reinsert jump links, you will see there is a red button that pops up at the top here. You click it once to create space before, after, delete. Now I hit save and stay because I've made changes in the text, and then hit jump links again, and you will see it has made those changes, it has pulled those changes through there. And that's how jump links works. I want to show you how jump links populate on the front end, although I do suspect that there have been some changes to this via IT as well, that the jump links are not populating. Yes, they are no longer populating at the top as you saw in my model overview. They are now populating on the side, but the same thing applies, that you are able to jump from section to section. That's how jump links works. Very, very plain and simple, and again, you can move or delete them by creating space before or after. Any changes that you make directly into here will look different on the front end because they're not going to be highlighted underneath. So the important thing to remember with jump link is any changes you make into the H2 and H3 blocks are not going to populate if you don't hit save and stay first, and any changes that you make here are not going to be affected on the front end. So always make your changes, hit save and stay, and then do your jump links from scratch. Next to jump links, we've got the insert embeds button, and that's quite simple. If you wanted to insert a social media post, which we saw somewhere here with the yellow cars. For example, over here, we have embedded a lovely social media post with these gorgeous integras. And the way that you would do that is using this embed button over here. And again, you would find the appropriate place in your article, put a bunch of space before and after, hit it, and then you copy and paste into this block the embedded code or the link or whatever. It can be from YouTube, it can be from Instagram. You need to make sure that you are allowed to embed those things though, so make sure that you have chatted to your team lead about that. If you click on the supported platforms, it just gives you an example of all the platforms that are supported. It can be from YouTube, it can be from TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, which I refuse to call X, and the like. So that is what the embeds button does. It's pretty straightforward. If you have any issues with it, you can just chat to your team lead about that. The update button is an interesting one. What we use it for is just for news pieces or articles that we have written that need to be updated with new information that has come up. And what you would simply do is just click on the update button, and it adds a little box as such with the date, the name of the person doing the change, and then any text that you wanted to add in. For example, if we were to say we received new information from so and so, and this is now correct. This is all rubbish, but just make it nice and neat, just so that you can see what it looks like. If you're using this, chances are you're going to be shown exactly how to do so by your team lead, and that's how it shows up. Little box at the top that says so-and-so updated it, and with the information that's been updated. Next to that, you have this magical button over here. And what this little button does, I'm just going to show it to you, but it's not something we use anymore. You'll see its pretty colors sort of indicate that there's some AI generation behind it, and that's because it basically reads the content of your article and creates key takeaways or key takeaway points from that article. And what you need to do, obviously, if you were to use it, we no longer use it because we have various other AI tools in place, but if you were to use it, you'd go right to the top of your article, hit save and stay to keep all of the latest content up to date, and then click and you will see it says generating, and then you simply wait out that time. All right, I've waited approximately 2 minutes and half a cup of coffee for it to generate these key takeaways, and it then reads what you've written and puts that in there for you. What I always suggest if you are going to use it is go back and just change the wording a little bit, because it does tend to read quite blandly. But that's what that does. Now we move back to this blocks button over here. We've explained the difference between plain, heading 2 and heading 3, and I just want to show you what the remaining ones are. The drop cap gives you a very cool intro, for example, here. And we basically use it just to make stuff look really, really fancy. And wherever you want to use the drop cap, you have to put your cursor there. I like to just select the first letter just because I'm paranoid like that. And then you simply click on drop cap. And you'll see it makes that entire paragraph sort of highlighted in a little box. And if you hit save and stay, it makes it look pretty fancy on the front end. Sort of like an old school book that we used to read in the libraries with the very lovely ornate first letter. And in this case, it's not all that ornate, but it looks pretty cool in any way. In this case, it's red because the Carver's logo is red. I presume it will be different on other sites. That's what the drop cap function is for. And the next two functions, I'm just going to move down into a little bit of space. The next two functions are called block quote and pull quote. And block quote looks as follows. If you click on it, it makes a little gray space like that. And if you were to just type in a bunch of words, I'm just going to do this to make it easier. You will see it elongates that to the length of your text. This button, this function, which is called block quote, is exactly the same as this button over here. I'm not sure why we have it duplicated, but it is. So you can either select block quote here or block quote there. You will see that we very often use this at the end of our articles, this is an old article, so it won't be there. I'm just trying to find one. We very often use the block quote function at the end of our articles to indicate sources that we have used. And I shall give you an example of it by scrolling down to the end of this article here. This is what a block quote looks like. It sort of highlights a little block for you to put anything in, and it highlights it in a gray, which is really, really nice. And it is mostly used for highlighting important information. I've used it to highlight definitions of certain things before. It's called a quote, a block quote, but there are other functions to quote people a little bit better if you did want to use it for that specifically. Underneath that, we have a pull quote, which if you click on it, gives you this little block over here. But whatever you type in there will come up as a quote on the front end. This is sort of the stylistic way that we do it at Carbuzz. What is my title? Deputy Editor, Carbuzz. And I'm going to hit save and stay and show you the difference between a block quote and a pull quote in preview. Over here is how our block quote will look. So it's literally just a highlighted block, and a little bit lower is how our pull quotes look, which is a little bit prettier. Those are those two functions. Straightforward. And below those we have similar boxes for tips, warning, notes, promoted, and more. So I'm going to go ahead and add those real quick in quick succession just for you to see the difference. We've got tip, warning, note. I'm going to put like a line of text in each one just so that you can see how it looks. And let's have a look at how that looks on the front end. As you can see, a tip box is in a blue, warning is in a red, note is in a yellow, and promoted is something that we would use, for example, if it was a sponsored post or something like that. Notes you will often find in articles such as here, which is a very useful way. Oh, this one doesn't have one. Naughty, naughty. Which is a very useful way for us to discuss our methodology. For example, oh, that's not good. Our methodology on how we arrived at certain things. For example, here, MSRPs excluding destinations. It's basically a little disclaimer box. You could also use the tip box to say something like, you know, if you're looking for a model in this lineup that has a little bit more luxury, try this trim. And warning would obviously be for something like don't try this at home, or we don't advise you do this job yourself, seek a professional's help, or if we were saying there is an urgent recall on something, we would use warning. That's what we would use those various tip boxes for, and they're great tools to use in your writing. And then there are 3 new functions that I have also just learned about, and I would just like to show them to you very briefly. I'm not 100% sure in what context you would use this, because to me it doesn't stand out the way that it should, but it's this, the expandable and the 2 float images. So if we have an expandable block and we want to put some wording in there, for example, I'm just going to copy and paste this. It appears on the front end as an area where you can click on see more to read more text, but it doesn't really stand out to me, so I'm not quite sure how you would use that. You'll see maybe you'll need a header or something in order to read more or read less. And then the float images are very interesting because you can literally do as it says. I'm just going to make some space, and you can literally have images floating around on your page. Type some text, and this could be really useful if you were going to show something very specific. For example, I'm just inserting images next to the text so that we can see what it looks like. Hit save and stay, and then it looks as follows. So I have an image over here and then some text next to it, and an image over here and some text next to it. So that could be really useful if you were explaining like the difference in a generation or something like that. That is what all of these blocks tools are for. And I think if you have that sort of done for the most part, you should be good. Now, underneath that, we have something here called apply style. And theoretically, that should be if you want to select a section of text and then apply one of those styles to it. There's also a spoiler alert button under this, for example. But in my experience, the apply style is a little bit finicky, and it can or can't or will or won't sometimes just make your life really difficult. So if you wanted to change the section that I've highlighted into a pull quote, that's how you would do it. In this case, it's worked really well. But yeah, so it's sort of interchangeable with the blocks over here if you wanted to go after the fact and do that. And then the last remaining buttons to quickly work through are these ones over here, which changes your text color, changes the background of your text color. And this button over here, which some of my writers are a huge fan of, which maximizes your screen so that all you see is that, and you then minimize it again. And these buttons over here, which you're absolutely familiar with, to embolden or to italicize, strike through, and then the very, very useful creating numbered lists, or similarly creating bullet points. Very straightforward. The button over here is, as I mentioned earlier, the block quote button. And that is the very sort of simple functions over there. That is generally the basics of how to use Emaki. There are a few little things that I can mention to you. For example, over here, you'll see your word count. The word count in Emaki encompasses words mentioned on things such as related links, display tags, and all of that. So if you see the word count here says 1317, that does not mean that there are 1,317 actual words that you have typed. It means that every single word on this page, including images, tags, display tags, trim tags, all of that includes 1,317 words. So just a tip that if your requirement to write is to write 1,500 words of text, and you have reached 1,500 words, including display tags, images, etc., that does not mean you've reached your word count. It means that you need to go over that a little bit to actually reach your word count. That's the very basics of how Emaki works. I trust that this little tutorial has not been too dreary, and that you will have been able to figure out how all of these things work. I'm just going to pause this video and double check that I have told you absolutely everything. The very last functionality in Emaki that I want to explain to you today is how to utilize the source code. I've alluded to it earlier on, but very basically everything that gets typed up in this box, including images, is something that you can convert to source code. And if I click on the source code button, it shows me that same box, just in all of that source code. Very theoretically then, whatever I copy from here, I can duplicate I can copy and paste this into another Emaki article, a blank one, and it will duplicate it to that extent. Now, the reason why this is important is that because of what I've called Emaki magic before, very often, if we are trying to make changes or if we're editing and things look a little bit wonky on the front end, before you make any changes, I always advise taking the source code, which means just clicking over here, selecting all of the text and copying it into a Google document and keeping it off to one side, so that any changes that you make here while you're editing and it may be affected negatively, you have a backup of that source code elsewhere. It's not something I want you to be paranoid about, however, but you need to know that that functionality is there. And the reason why that functionality is very, very important to know how to use is that there are something that we call templates across our various auto sites that make your life easier. And a template is exactly what it says it is. It's a predefined layout that you can utilize just to fill in the data. And I'm going to show you an example of that real quick. If, for example, you've been told that there is a template of source code available for whatever project that you're writing, you will be provided with a document that looks like this. It looks like a bunch of gobbledygook because that's what it is. It's literal source code. And what you need to do then is to go into your Emaki documents and make sure that you've got a blank space here. So for this example, I'm going to delete absolutely everything. And to make sure that that is deleted and cleared, I'm going to click on source and it is empty. And then basically what I do is I go into my source code document, select everything, copy it, and paste it into the source code block. If you paste it into the regular block, you get gobbledygook. Okay? If you make sure that you've clicked on source, and we know that we've clicked on source because it's grayed out, and you paste the gobbledygook, and you then unselect source, you get this beautiful layout that's pre-populated for you with tables, note boxes as required, and headings that prompt you how to go about doing what you need to do. And that's how source code works. If you are inclined to understand source code and coding and all of that, you are also then able to go into the source code and make changes here. However, if you don't know what you're doing and you delete something along here in the source code, you can't get it back again. So only if you are really familiar with how source code works would I advise doing that. But in general, it's a very simple process of just copying the source code that's provided to you into the source code box, hitting source code again, and then you see that on the front end. That's the simplest way that you are going to get writing is if you are provided templates to copy into that. And that's it. All right, the last thing that I just want to show you very briefly is how to use the Sandbox feature. The Sandbox feature is very useful if we already have an article that's live on the site, meaning it's already been published, and we want to make changes to the content of it without affecting what we see on the front end in real time. And we do that using the Sandbox or the Republish feature. Depending on the intent that you'll be writing for, you may be asked to do Repubs, and if you are asked to do a Repub, this is the feature that you'll use. So you're inside the article and you will click on Sandbox or Republish, and you'll see in this case there's nothing other than these two options. If you are just wanting to make general changes to update an article, you'll do an open general sandbox, or if you've been told to do a repub, you will use this button over here. In the event that an article has already had a repub or has been changed before, you may see something else lower down here, but that will be logical and it will make sense to you at the time. So very firstly, if we want to open the general sandbox, it looks exactly like it would normally look, except at the top here, it tells you that you're in the sandbox. Now, the cool thing about whatever you're doing in here is you can stuff around, you can change images, you can do absolutely anything, change up the layout, put in new things, and it won't in any way affect what we see on the front end of the sandbox, on the front end of the site. You have various options here that you can compare to the latest revision, or you can preview your changes, and that's just like the standard preview. It's the same as this button over here, but this previews specifically the changes that you've made here in the sandbox. Once you have completed it and want to do whatever you want to publish this to this front end of the site, in other words, to make your changes live, you would click on the Insert Sandbox into Content. You only want to do that once you're 100% sure that the changes are exactly as you wanted. If you are busy making changes in the sandbox and you're doing it over some time and you don't necessarily want to continue for that day or whatever, you can just hit save and stay or even save and exit, and it will keep those changes in your sandbox. So for example, I'm going to do this. These are sandbox changes, and then I'm going to hit save. This is not going to impact in any way, shape, or form what you see on the front end of the site, but it will save the changes to your sandbox. So if I want to go back into that article and continue working the following day on my sandbox, you just enter the article, and you'll see that the content in the original box down here will be exactly as it was on the front end of the site. You see there's nothing there about sandbox. However, if I then go to the sandbox, you'll see my changes have saved there, which is really great, which means you can update things over time, and only when you are absolutely certain that you want to publish those changes do you hit Insert Sandbox into Content. Now, the same thing applies to, I'm just going to delete the sandbox because it's not necessary. The same thing applies if you were doing a repub. If you're doing a repub, it looks a little bit different because it's got all of this admin up here, and this will depend on your permissions and your role. For example, if you're an editor, this is going to apply to you. If you're just a writer, this is not necessarily going to apply to you unless you've been asked to write Repub specifically, in which case you may need to use this over here. Exactly the same applies lower down in terms of saving your sandbox, keeping your sandbox until you're ready to publish it. But the difference would be that you can either delete it here or that you can create and republish it. But to do that, you need to fill in this information here. And this will be given to you by your segment lead, but I'll just run through it very quickly. The republish date is exactly what it said it is. On which date do you want this to be republished? You can schedule it for months in advance. And then here you need to change it to complete when you're ready. You can republish under embargo, meaning only people with embargo permissions have access to it. And then you need to add the contributors, who the author was, who the segment lead is, and who you, the editor, are. And then your obvious payment categories and author payments, because this differs. The person who's doing the actual repub gets a different payment. The editor gets a different payment. This is information that will be told to you, which you need to fill in before this button becomes available for you to create and republish that article. It's super simple and straightforward, but it's a really useful tool, and I hope that that covers it.